So before we jump in, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the last time you used an AI assistant, just in general?
Yeah, actually, I've been really playing around with AI assistants recently, and it was actually just this morning, and you wouldn't believe it. It was to try to help me with gardening. It's this new hobby that I'm trying to get into. I'm not really that good at it, so I've been using AI assistants to help me with that. So being able to kind of do things like uploading an image of what my garden looks like, giving it information about the soil and the weather and things, and just asking it for tips on what kind of plants and what kind of tools I need to buy to actually make it happen. So I'm hoping this is the year that I could actually make this happen. But yeah, Srinath, what about you? Where have you been using AI?
That's awesome to hear that. For me, the interesting use case that comes to mind is, so I have a daughter who's 3 years old, and so she's quite picky when it comes to doing things like eating food and walking too much and things like that. So off late, what I've found is AI assistants do a really good job of making suggestions for, like, let's say you're going on a trip and you want to find out, okay, tell me an itinerary for XYZ place, which is toddler friendly. And it does a pretty good job of laying things out, including when to make stops for food and things like that. So definitely seen a lot of really good value in that. Just a quick question to all of you. Just raise your hands. How many of you have used an AI assistant for something, say, in the past 24 hours? Awesome. Now, how about when it comes to work? So this is great on the personal front. We definitely see a lot of use cases there. How about work? Do you use AI assistants when you're working?
A lot. I found AI assistant super helpful at work. I've been finding it's been helping me with a number of different use cases. You know, everything from helping me draft emails to summarizing meeting notes, which I'm really bad at doing myself, to helping me with PowerPoint presentations. I've just been finding it really helpful in just increasing my productivity and trying to do those different tasks. What about you, Srinath?
Some of those use cases really seem very, very similar to the ones that I use. The particular one that I would call out is, in my background, I've done a lot of writing, been in product marketing, been in different places where I've had to do a lot of writing, but I still get writer's block anytime and I need to start writing a document. So what I find really useful is I just go ask an AI assistant, like maybe on Drive or on Docs, like, can you help me with a template for how to write such and such a document? And it does a very good job of giving me a template. And I feel that that's a really good trick to really get past that writer's block and get going. Again, quick audience poll. How many of you have used AI assistants for work or do so on a recurring basis? Awesome. So as you can imagine, over the course of the rest of the session, we're going to be talking to you about a specific use case of AI assistants. That is, how can you use it as a developer? So this is what the flow is going to look like. I'm going to spend a few minutes quickly telling you about Gemini Code Assist and the flow for the rest of the session. Then I'm going to hand off to Mo, and we're going to be off to the races. Over the course of this session, we hope to talk to you about how you can use AI assistants in your IDE to do all kinds of tasks and things that might help you be more productive as a developer or help developers in your organization be more productive. At the same time, we're going to talk about security, because oftentimes one of the questions we get asked when you think about AI assistants is, okay, great, this is going to help me with velocity. People are going to go a lot faster when they're using these kind of capabilities. What does that mean for processes I have in place with respect to security? What does it mean for processes about making sure my developers continue to be as familiar with their code base as you would expect them to? So with that said, I'm sure you all must have heard this many, many times. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but Duet AI for developers, for those of you who are familiar with it now, is called Gemini Code Assist. And since its launch, we've been seeing a lot of people, a lot of traction with respect to enterprises and developers really using it. And in addition, no matter where you are in your IDE, no matter which IDE form factor you're using, whether it's Visual Studio Code, whether it's the JetBrains family of IDEs, you can get a Gemini Code Assist over there. So as you can see here, like most of the places where you're probably spending your time as a developer, you'll probably be able to see Gemini Code Assist there. With that, I'm going to hand off to you, Mo, to talk about Snyk a little bit.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Srinath. So maybe some of you attended Gabe's keynote or Gabe's Spotlight a little bit earlier, where you learned a little bit more about Snyk. So Snyk is a developer security platform founded in 2015 and venture-backed. And taking a step back just for a moment, I just want to describe sort of the problem statement of why Snyk was even founded and kind of the problem statement that Snyk sets out to solve for. Kind of the best way to be able to describe that is just to kind of think about the software industry and how the series of kind of very impactful shifts that have taken place over the past kind of number of decades. Long gone are the days of waterfall development, and in its place, the DevOps movement has really picked up, enabling teams to be able to build and deploy code with ever-increasing rates of velocity. And with more and more workloads that are moving to the cloud, moving to Google Cloud, the role of developers to manage and deploy their own applications is really increasing as well. And actually, infrastructure is now being managed as code as well. Now, when you layer in AI, this problem of just where do you insert security without decreasing developer velocity really begins to be complicated by multiple folds. Tools like Gemini Code Assist, like Srinath just talked about, are really amazing tools in helping you to become more and more productive. Now, one of the challenges that exists is with this increased velocity in terms of productivity that's coming into play, security is just not able to keep up. And one of the reasons for that is because there really isn't a great insertion point for security in the SDLC without really bringing developer velocity down to a halt. And this is really the problem that Snyk tries to set out to solve for. So Snyk, as I mentioned earlier, is a developer security platform, and its aim is to enable organizations to be able to balance those two things. To really enable developers to be able to develop with velocity while still kind of finding and fixing vulnerabilities while they're developing in real time, while still enabling security organizations to be able to manage and mitigate risk holistically across their organization. So Snyk's developer security platform empowers developers, as I mentioned, to be able to find and fix those security vulnerabilities, not only in the code that they're writing, but also in open source dependencies, inside of containers, and IAC files as well. Our solution is built on top of an AI platform that we call Deep Code AI. Deep Code AI is something that we've trained and kind of fine-tuned to understand source code and to understand security use cases specifically. All of our products are tightly integrated into existing developer workflows and developer tools. And really what that enables is to be able to enable developers, as they're writing code, as they're building their applications, to be able to scan their code, find vulnerabilities, be able to fix them in real time. And at the same time, able to enable organizations to be able to scale up their security teams and give them sort of a central control plane. They can be able to manage and mitigate risks across all of their different teams and across all of their different organizations that exist out there.
So this is really interesting, especially how you're bringing security into different places in the secure software supply chain. So, and as you're aware, there's been a lot of vulnerabilities that come up, and even as recently as last week, we had a major vulnerability that came out. And so I'm sure there is a lot of value that you're delivering by really making sure that these security checks are there in the right place. And I'm very excited to hear from you about how we're specifically bringing that to developers to really help them be more secure, but also more productive.
Yeah,
so we can't talk about how we can make things make developers more productive without first looking at what are the current challenges that they're facing. So if you take a look at some of the challenges that developers really face today is, especially, let's start off with the first time you start working on a project. So you're going to move into let's say you move into a new company, you move into a new role. Now the first thing that you need to do is really familiarize yourself with the existing code base. You need to understand what code exists, what it does, how it's being used. In a lot of these kind of situations, there's some organizational nuance and what we've often called like tribal knowledge, like people who are in the organization are the ones who know about exactly how these things work. So there is, of course, a lot of documentation and places like that that you need to go and learn about these things, but then there's also the people. So there's talking to them, there's understanding what the code does, there might be some nuances here and there. So that's one thing that really slows you down when you're getting started. And once you get past that, even when you're, say, a productive developer at an organization, oftentimes there's a lot of context switching that you have to do. You're jumping between different tools, different surfaces. We'll get into that in a bit. But beyond that, there is also often a lot of maintenance cost that comes from technical debt, figuring out bugs, fixing them, making sure that you're keeping your code running efficiently and optimally. And a lot of these lead to repetitive tasks, like making sure you're doing the right unit tests, you're writing unit tests as you go along, et cetera, et cetera. And I haven't even talked about security yet. So anything specific from the security perspective that
I mean,
comes to mind?
Srinath, the process you just mentioned there is pretty cumbersome. It's pretty long, and that's, like you mentioned, that's without kind of layering in security in place. And I think one of the big challenges with this is security typically comes in at the very end of the process. Usually when you're running security scans in this model, security scans run at build time, so a ton of vulnerabilities are introduced. And what happens is about thousands of vulnerabilities are found. They're usually put into a spreadsheet or a big PDF and then thrown over the wall at development teams. And there's a big challenge there now for development teams to be able to try to figure out, well, which ones should you actually be fixing? What do these security vulnerabilities mean? Which one should I fix now? Which ones are sort of not a risk that I'm okay to have in my code base? Kind of making this even worse is oftentimes at this point, development teams have already moved on to work on a different project. So there's sort of like the startup cost as well to just kind of understand the context of the code to begin with before you can even answer those questions. So definitely a really big and sort of cumbersome and time-consuming process that takes place today.
And going one step deeper, here's just a few surfaces that you have to jump to as a developer, right? You may get started in your IDE, you spend the most amount of time in your IDE when you're writing code, but oftentimes you have to go look up dependencies. When you find the dependency that you want, how do you know is it the right one? You spend a bunch of time researching it, figuring out what are the different capabilities, which ones do you want to really depend on, because in a lot of cases, these dependencies are then going to come along with you every step of the way. You never know when there might be some zero-day vulnerability that comes along, and then that decision that you made today is something you're then going to have to work with and live with for a long time to come. Now, beyond that, often you have to jump to project documentation, you have to go to the repository, do stuff there, look at documentation for the different dependencies that you're working on. And so there's a lot of context switching that really happens along the way. And not to mention the security scanning that happens right at oftentimes the end of your development cycle. And okay, I've finished writing my code, now I start the commit process, and I come back and see that, okay, something failed. Now I've context switched off of this. I have to switch back into context, figure out exactly what's wrong, and go fix it. So there is a lot of things in your way when it comes to being fast and being productive. So this is where I think Gemini Code Assist can really help you with the productivity part of it. And I'm going to really, over the course of this demo, we're going to look through demos. We're going to see some of these things in more detail. So, but at a very high level, right? You can ask Gemini Code Assist questions about your code. You can ask questions about your code base. You can ask for help with the design. Like if you have as a developer, when you're writing code, if you're hitting some kind of a block, you can just have it generate a starting point for you. And then you go from there, you make the changes you want. And you can also iterate talking to Gemini, trying to figure out how you want to do this. The nice thing about the chat box that you get with Gemini Code Assist, all that research that you want to do with respect to a dependency, you can now just ask a question there. You go back and forth. It's going to give you resources. It's going to give you pointers. It's going to help you literally get started with a given dependency, right? And of course, there are so many sessions you all might have attended here, learning about different Google Cloud products, the APIs they provide. And so there's a lot of times that you have to use a certain API. And the first time you're getting started again, or first time you're getting started in a specific context, it really helps to have that jump start where it can pull in an API for you, tell you how to use it, etc. So over the next few slides, I'm going to just quickly walk you through what some of these things look like, and then we'll see we'll see a demo of some of these flows in here as well. So first off, let's talk about explaining code. So let's say you're new to this company and you want to get started quickly. You can just select sections of code and have Gemini Code Assist explain it to you. It's going to tell you exactly what different pieces of code do, and it's going to really help you get past that initial block quickly. Now, if you watched Gabe's keynote again, you probably also learned about what we're doing with respect to code customization. So again, there's going to be things where you can learn about specifics of your repository, specifics of your code base, and you can go pretty much in a lot of detail there. Let's say once you've gotten past that and you're starting to use an API, you can say, hey, tell me how to use an API. You can ask Gemini Code Assist to give me a sample for a certain use case of an API. It can point you to more sources where you can read more about this, learn more about this. So again, with using an API, you can go really, really fast and get started. Then once you've understood what you want to do, you can have it generate your code sample. It's going to generate your sample. It's going to cite code, tell you where it is whenever there is a citation for code coming from somewhere, it's going to give you visibility into that so that you can figure out exactly what code you're using. It also lets you generate fairly complex sections of code, and you must have seen that in the keynote as well, again with the demo, where it's not just doing it in one file, but doing code generation across multiple files, across multiple contexts, and just helping you get started with solving an end-to-end problem rather than just a point problem in one particular scenario. And lastly, we also have, lastly, we also have generating unit tests. I think so when you finish writing your code, it can also help you generate unit tests by taking your section of code and making sure you have the right unit tests in place so that you can really make sure that your code is not just there, but it's also robust and being tested properly. Yeah. With that, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Snyk helps in the IDE as well?
Yeah, definitely. And we'll show everybody a demo kind of coming up once we get kind of through these couple slides of how you can use Gemini, Code Assist, and Snyk together to really kind of improve that process that we talked about. A little bit earlier, I talked about one of the best ways to be able to scale up security across an organization is to empower developers and insert at every point of the SDLC process, so directly within existing developer workflows. One of the best insertion points is actually within the IDE itself. So what we see on the screen here is the Snyk IDE extension. So this is where developers can receive near real-time scan results in terms of, and find out the types of security vulnerabilities that are present directly within their code. So what we're showing here is scan results of security vulnerabilities that exist within first-party source code. As I mentioned earlier, we can also scan and find vulnerabilities that exist within IAC files, vulnerabilities for open source dependencies, and container images as well. Now, one of the benefits of leveraging Snyk is we can scan the source code directly. So there's no requirement to have to compile your code, to have to kind of provide us with binaries or anything. It's just scan your source code directly as you're working on it. And then you're able to get kind of vulnerabilities very quickly with very minimal effort as well. So on the left-hand side is where you see the vulnerabilities here on the screen, so a summary of everything. And then for every vulnerability that Snyk is able to identify, we actually dive into the details of those vulnerabilities as well. So we're able to provide information about why Snyk thinks this is a vulnerability that's specific inside of your source code, and also provides example fixes as well. So these are example fixes that we're able to kind of pull from the open source community about how a similar type of vulnerability was fixed in an open source project. Now, Snyk's North Star is not just about finding vulnerabilities, but we want to enable developers to be able to fix those vulnerabilities as well and really bring down the risk profile. So we can do that using Deep Code AI Fix. So this is where Snyk is able to leverage generative AI to create and apply a fix for the vulnerabilities that is specific to your source code and specific to that vulnerability as well. Because Deep Code AI can really understand code and we fine-tune the models for code and for security use cases, we're able to ensure that the fix that's being applied is actually inserted in the right location. And you can see that here as one of the examples, where the fix is actually being applied on two different lines, which is highlighted here in green, on line 24 and line 33. And if you take a look at the part here that's being inserted on line 33, this is a use function that the variable app is calling. But that line has only been inserted after the variable has actually been instantiated. So because we understand the source code, we don't just fix the vulnerability, we also try to ensure that the fixes are applied at the correct location for your source code as well.
So for this particular example, if I may ask you something, we're talking about a code base here. We're talking about developers who are consistently developing. I know this has come up in some conversations we've had with customers. So oftentimes organizations they have two sets of things they need to look at. So there is vulnerabilities that they find in the code base the first time they start running, say, a Snyk scan. And then there's vulnerabilities that are newly introduced every time a developer might write code. So what do you recommend in terms of how our customers or our audience can really, how should they differentiate the two and how do they tackle that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, in terms of adding new code that's coming into play, the IDE extension is a really great place to be able to do that. As you're developing new code, you can continuously run your scans, your results are coming in real time, and then wherever we've got a fix available, you can see that on the screen that we'll present it to you, similar to the way that we're presenting on the right-hand side, and developers can fix those very quickly. Now, there is another use case that you mentioned, which is, hey, you know what? I actually have an application that's already been built. We're not really touching it very often, or so that's when you kind of point it, and then you come up with thousands of vulnerabilities that might already exist in that application. So this same type of functionality is actually available in a number of different points. So here we're just showing the IDE extension. What we're planning on actually rolling out later this year is to provide an API. where you can just be able to kind of automate the fixing of vulnerabilities that already exist inside of your existing application. So it's a really great way to be able to, in a very short amount of time, just to automate reducing kind of any risk that exists with existing code bases, which is really great.
That's really awesome. Over the next few slides, we told you how we're going to show you some of this stuff in action as well. So over the next few slides, we're going to really talk through how you can, first off, use Gemini Code Assist and Snyk together today. And then once we get past that, we're also going to talk for a couple of minutes about the announcement that was made in Gabe's keynote about what we have coming in the roadmap later this year as well. So first off, let's look at what we can do today. So there are 3 key things that you can do today, and we're going to look at demos for most of these. So first off, when you use Gemini Code Assist, so we've been working with Snyk to get access to a lot of their documentation, to their learning content, so that when you do ask Gemini Code Assist questions about vulnerabilities, about coding practices, it's going to give you meaningful responses that can help you understand what's happening as a developer, so that you can build those muscles of making sure that as you write code, you're watching out for these vulnerabilities and making sure that they don't creep in. Beyond that, you can ask questions about how to use Snyk, because obviously Gemini Code Assist knows about the documentation, and it can tell you what are different ways to integrate Snyk into your software supply chain. And you can go deeper as you start writing this code and explain some of these vulnerabilities and explain how to fix them and things like that. So with that, let's maybe start taking a look at the demo here. So the first thing that you see here on the screen is, so the developer here is using the Snyk extension, and they find this vulnerability. Now, as a developer, I want to know, what does this vulnerability really mean? All I have to do is I go into Gemini and I ask it to explain to me what this specific vulnerability is, and it's going to go through and explain to you exactly what this vulnerability is, what it does, why you should watch out for it, and that's going to help you not just take a fix and apply it right there and say, okay, I think I'm done, but to understand why you're fixing this. What is this vulnerability? And these are the muscles that's going to help you improve and make sure you don't run into these kind of issues on an ongoing basis, right? So as you can see here, it tells you what this vulnerability is, some tips in terms of how to manage it, and then to go from there. So do you want to walk us through the fix path?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a great first step. So now that we've understood the vulnerability, we know what it is, we know why it's important for us to be able to kind of prioritize. Now let's move on to the fix and how we can actually apply that fix. And here we can leverage Deep Code AI Fix, which we just went through. What you see on the screen here over on the right-hand side is a number of fix candidates that actually gets generated. So what you saw here just kind of very quickly earlier, as soon as you click the Fix This button, a number of fix candidates are provided. And then you can scroll through each one of those different fix candidates to be able to determine which one do you want to apply. One of the interesting things to kind of keep note of is every fix candidate that we provide, and we ensure that no new net vulnerability will actually be introduced because of that fix candidate. What we're doing underneath the background is actually, before presenting any of the fix candidates that you saw on the screen earlier, we actually run another scan of your code base with that fix candidate inserted, just to make sure there's no net new security vulnerability that's being introduced, and you can apply those with confidence. The thing that underpins all of that and makes it possible is our engine and how fast it is in terms of scanning. And what you saw a little bit earlier was we applied the fix, which is starts on line 18 and goes down to line 24. It's highlighted in green, so you know exactly where that fix is being applied. And then a scan did run after we saved our file, and you notice over on the left-hand side, a refreshed set of vulnerabilities are now shown. So we did have 11 vulnerabilities, and we were able to kind of bring that down to 8. So 3 instances of that allocation of resources vulnerabilities were able to be remediated with just 1 fix being applied. And just to kind of note again here, because we do understand the source code, we're able to ensure that we apply the fix in the correct location. So although the vulnerability we were looking at was on line 160 or so, the fix was applied on line 18 and optimized to try to reduce as many of the vulnerabilities as possible that exist in the code base.
Now, as a developer, I'm looking at this fix, and what I want to do next is I really want to understand what this fix is, right? So if we look at what we're doing here is we're selecting the lines of code that got inserted as a part of the fix, and we're having Gemini explain it to us. And this is, again, going to explain the code, tell us what the change is, what it looks like, what it does, and that way you can not just make these changes, but you can understand and make sure that nothing really got changed with respect to how your application was supposed to behave before and after you patched in the fix. And this is where, like, when we go back and look at that use case of as a developer, I'm writing net new code, it really helps me be productive because I have a deep understanding of everything I've written. If I see there is a new vulnerability that came in, without leaving the IDE, I have fixed it, I have analyze the fix, make sure that I understand it, and make sure that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to, and I can, with confidence, move on to the next step.
Yeah, and that's a really important part of this as well. It's there's a number of fix candidates that get provided, and just being able to leverage Gemini to just very quickly be able to understand like what exactly is that code doing is really, really important and helps shorten like a lot of the steps that we had talked about earlier. So let's go on to the next step, which is now that you've applied the vulnerability, you understand the vulnerability, you've determined the fix that you want to apply, you understand the code that's actually being created and what it's doing, you can sort of close the entire loop now and start to generate unit tests. So you've got the confidence in it, you've run the scans, your code is now secure, close the loop and start to apply unit tests. And you can leverage Gemini to be able to do that as we're showing on the screen here. So what we showed a little bit earlier here is that same piece of code that we've introduced that does the fix, highlighting it and then asking Gemini to apply unit tests. Those unit tests are presented on the left-hand side here, and then you have a number of different options available to you. You can insert those unit tests in a specific file. In this case, we actually chose to insert it in a net new file. We click save, and then we're off and running. And what's really cool about what we just went through in terms of kind of leveraging Gemini and leveraging Snyk together is that big convoluted chart that Srinath had gone through earlier, and kind of that flowchart, which is fairly difficult and convoluted and takes a lot of time. We're able to really simplify the process by leveraging these two tools together. And we didn't slow down any of the developer velocity, and we didn't kind of have to compromise on security or on the source or on the quality of the code itself, which is really great. Now, everything that we went through here today is available now with the Gemini Code Assist IDE extension and leveraging the Snyk IDE extension as well. One of the things that we're looking to do together is how do we make this experience even more seamless and make the user experience even better? We previewed some of that at one of the spotlight sessions that was earlier today. But Srinath, do you want to take us through kind of some of the things that we're thinking of doing together to make this experience a lot better?
Absolutely. So as you saw here, the two extensions that exist today, and as Mo mentioned, they work very well together to begin with. But what we're doing later this year is we are working on bringing some of these abilities right into the extension. So later this year, using the Gemini Code Assist extension, as you're developing, you will be able to have it run scans for you, figure out if there are any vulnerabilities right there. And once you have those vulnerabilities, it will also help you, as Mo showed you earlier, like a couple of slides back, you'll be able to generate fixes based on Deep Code AI's fix and have those injected into your code as well right there so that you can do all of this right from that one interface of the Gemini extension. So as you can see here, what's happening is a scan has been run. We found this vulnerability. And we go through generating a quick fix, and first we say, explain this vulnerability to me. So as you can see, it can explain to you what the vulnerability is. It's going to tell you what the problem is, how you can go about fixing it. And once you do that, you can also go and almost as easily just say, fix this using Gemini plus Snyk. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull those Deep Code AI fixes, put them in there, and make sure that the fix is injected right here in the IDE. So what we're really trying to do is, as we talk through this whole thing, reduce the number of times as a developer you have to really go out of the IDE, which is your favorite place to be in and to write code, I guess, and to really be able to solve a lot of the problems where you might have to otherwise context switch out right from within the IDE. With that, I think we also have some more sessions coming up later. Like, for instance, one quick thing I do want to call out is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, there is a session that's going to talk a lot more about the customizing Gemini Code Assist so that it's really familiar with your code base and can help you with insights and fixes just based on what's in your code base. So if you are interested, I definitely suggest going and visiting that. And of course, the Snyk booth as well. Was there anything else you wanted to add beyond that?
Yeah, no. So we did have a session, I believe this took place yesterday, so hopefully folks were able to attend this session of building secure AI-powered software supply chains. And like Srinath mentioned, if you're interested in learning more about Snyk, learning more about the integration and the partnership that we're doing, feel free to stop by the Snyk booth, booth 360. I think what's really exciting is some of the stuff that we showed you here today that's available today, and then kind of going to the next step is just one of the things that's really exciting about this partnership and this integration is we want to continuously kind of remove kind of any of the friction that's involved. So with this new integration that we're rolling out that'll be in preview, it's effectively just a single tool. You work within Gemini and you get access to all of these different things. And just over time, we'll continue to try to make sure that the space between security and your developer productivity just continues to shrink and shrink, where it just becomes an even more seamless experience over time.
All right, so we have a few minutes to take any questions. Any questions in the audience?
Yeah.
So with the fixed candidates, you said it runs a second scan to make sure there's no additional vulns found. If there are any found, what does the code assist do at that point?
So we don't surface them for you. So for folks who may not have heard, the question was, with the deep code AI fix, we run scans for any of the fixed candidates that we come up with, just to ensure that we're not introducing a net new security vulnerability. So actually, I'll go into maybe a little bit detail into how we do that. When Snyk scans your source code, we actually convert it into what we call an event graph. So it's sort of this intermediate representation that models how your application works. Which function calls which other function, how do the variables kind of flow in between. When we generate the fixed candidates, we actually insert that into the event graph, and then we run another scan of that. If we find that there's a new security vulnerability introduced, we just don't surface that fixed candidate to you as a potential candidate. If we find that that doesn't introduce a net new security vulnerability and we've got a high level of confidence that this will fix your vulnerability, then we do surface that for you as a fixed scan, and you can go through and then be able to leverage Gemini to try to understand what exactly is that code doing, is it the right one to be able to apply, and then go ahead and be able to apply it.
All right. Thank you, folks. We'll be here for a few more minutes if you have any questions for us. Thanks for joining us. Hope you all have a great rest of the Cloud Next as well, and have a great evening.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everybody.